Something happened recently that your soulmate was not expecting, and although it may have looked like an ordinary moment from the outside, it created an emotional reaction they could not easily explain. They were going through their day, focused on their own responsibilities, when suddenly something appeared in front of them that brought you back into their mind with surprising intensity. It could have been a familiar place, a particular song, a phrase someone casually mentioned, a photograph, or even a situation that carried the same feeling as a moment you once shared. At first, they probably tried to dismiss it. They may have told themselves it was simply a coincidence, something their mind connected because of an old memory. But the more they tried to continue with their day, the more strongly the reminder stayed with them. And listen carefully, because this is where something inside your soulmate began to shift. They did not just remember you, they remembered how they felt when they were connected to you. Suddenly, emotions they thought had become quiet started becoming noticeable again. A conversation they had almost forgotten came back. A particular moment between you replayed in their mind. They may have remembered something you said that they never fully understood at the time. And what surprised them most was the emotional reaction that came with those memories. Why did something so small bring back so much? Why did their heart react before their mind could explain what was happening? These questions began following them long after the original reminder had disappeared. Your soulmate may have tried to distract themselves, but the feeling remained. They started wondering whether there was a reason this particular memory appeared at this particular time. They may not have immediately called it a sign, but they could not deny that it felt significant to them. Because your heart needs to hear this, sometimes a reminder becomes powerful, not because of what we see, but because of what it awakens inside us. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that this moment touched an emotional place they had never completely closed. It reminded them that despite the distance, despite everything that happened, the connection still carries meaning within them. And now they are beginning to look back at the story with different eyes. What they once considered finished may not feel quite as finished anymore. That single unexpected reminder has opened a door inside their thoughts, and behind that door are memories, questions and feelings they thought they had already left behind. And the deeper they look, the more they are beginning to wonder whether this love story truly reached its final chapter, or whether life is quietly preparing them to understand something they were not ready to see before. And after that unexpected reminder, something continued happening inside your soulmate that they could not simply brush aside. The moment itself may have lasted only a few seconds, but the emotions it awakened stayed with them much longer. They found themselves returning to the memory again and again, almost as though their mind was trying to understand why that particular reminder affected them so deeply. At first, they may have tried to treat it like an ordinary coincidence. They may have told themselves that people naturally remember the past when something familiar appears. But the more they reflected, the more they realized that this was not simply about remembering you. It was about remembering a version of themselves that existed when you were part of their life. And that realization began opening an emotional chapter they thought they had already closed. Your soulmate started replaying certain conversations in their mind. They remembered things they said and things they left unsaid. They remembered moments when they could have expressed themselves differently. They remembered times when the connection felt close, followed by moments when fear, confusion, timing, or circumstances created distance. And as they looked back with the maturity they have gained since then, some of those moments began appearing differently. What once seemed like a final ending may now look more like a complicated turning point. What once felt like rejection may now seem connected to fear or misunderstanding. What once appeared insignificant may now feel strangely meaningful. Because your heart needs to hear this, distance can sometimes change the way a person understands their own history. When your soulmate was living through those moments, they were reacting to emotions in real time. They may not have had the patience or clarity to understand everything that was happening inside them. But now they have the advantage of perspective. They can look backward without being completely trapped inside the emotions that once controlled them. And that perspective is causing them to notice things they previously overlooked. They may remember how naturally their thoughts return to you, even after trying to move forward. They may remember certain feelings that never completely disappeared. They may remember how some experiences simply did not carry the same emotional impact. And slowly, they begin connecting these memories together. One memory alone might mean very little, but several memories forming the same emotional pattern can make someone stop and think. Your soulmate may start wondering why this connection continues appearing in their thoughts when they believed they had already moved beyond it. They may question whether they truly found closure or whether they simply became accustomed to living without answers. And this question can become surprisingly emotional, because if they never truly closed the chapter, then what exactly did they close? Did they close the connection itself, or did they simply stop talking about it? Did they stop caring, or did they learn how to hide what they cared about? These questions can create a quiet tension inside them. They are not necessarily ready to make a dramatic decision, but they are becoming more honest with themselves. And honesty changes everything. Instead of automatically telling themselves that the past belongs in the past, they are allowing themselves to examine why it still matters. They may even begin noticing other small reminders around them. A familiar name appearing unexpectedly, a place connected to a memory, a song that suddenly carries a completely different emotional meaning, a conversation that reminds them of something you once said. Whether these things are simple coincidences or meaningful personal associations, your soulmate is experiencing them through an emotional lens that makes them feel significant. And the important part is not whether the universe is sending a specific message. The important part is what these reminders reveal about their own heart. They reveal that something about you still matters enough to awaken a response. Something about the connection still carries emotional weight. And now your soulmate is beginning to ask a much deeper question. If this story were truly finished inside them, why does their heart still react when something brings you to mind? That question is beginning to stay with them. It follows them into quiet moments. It appears when they are alone. It makes them revisit memories they once avoided. And gradually, they are realizing that perhaps the reminder did not reopen the past simply to make them feel nostalgic. Perhaps it reopened something because they are finally mature enough to understand what that chapter meant. They are beginning to see that the connection may have changed them in ways they did not recognize at the time. It may have taught them about vulnerability, emotional honesty, patience, or the courage required to truly let someone matter. And now, instead of immediately pushing those memories away, they are allowing themselves to listen. They are beginning to understand that sometimes a powerful reminder does not arrive to tell us exactly what will happen next. Sometimes it simply shows us what still has meaning within us. And for your soulmate, that realization is becoming harder and harder to ignore. The more they look back, the more they begin wondering whether what they once called the ending was actually only a pause in a story they never completely understood. And now your soulmate is beginning to move beyond the memories themselves and into a much deeper realization about why this connection continues to return to their awareness. The reminder did something they were not expecting. It made them question whether the story was truly about the past at all, or whether it was about everything they learned because of what happened between you. For a long time, they may have believed that if a connection ended, then its purpose must have ended with it. But as they reflect now, they are beginning to understand that some relationships continue shaping us long after circumstances change. And perhaps that is why your connection still carries such emotional weight for them. It taught them something about themselves that they could not easily learn anywhere else. They may now recognize that being around you brought certain emotions to the surface that they had spent years keeping hidden. Maybe you challenged them to become more vulnerable. Maybe you made them realize how important emotional honesty really is. Maybe you showed them that being understood can feel very different from simply being accepted. Whatever the lesson was, your soulmate is beginning to see that the connection was not meaningless simply because the timing was complicated. Because your heart needs to hear this, sometimes the importance of a connection is not measured by how long it lasted, but by how deeply it changed the people involved. And your soulmate is beginning to understand that now. As they revisit the past, they may find themselves wondering whether they would make different choices if they had another opportunity. They may remember moments when they held back because they were afraid. They may remember opportunities to communicate that they allowed to pass. They may think about how different things could have been if they had understood their emotions sooner. These thoughts are not necessarily creating regret. They are creating awareness. Your soulmate is seeing the past through a more mature perspective, and that perspective is changing what the future means to them. They are beginning to realize that the person they were then is not the person they are now. They have experienced things since then. They have learned from mistakes. They have discovered what they truly value. And because they have changed, the idea of reconnecting with you no longer feels exactly like returning to the past. In their mind, it could mean creating something different with two people who have grown. That possibility may still feel uncertain, but it is no longer impossible. And that is a major emotional shift. Before, they may have assumed that too much had happened, and that there was no reason to look back. Now they are wondering whether looking back could actually help them understand where they want to go next. They may ask themselves whether the connection ended because it was never meant to continue, or because neither of you was ready to handle it properly at the time. They may wonder whether circumstances were simply wrong, whether fear influenced decisions, or whether both of you needed distance to become the people capable of understanding the connection differently. These questions can create a strange combination of hope and uncertainty. They do not have proof of what the future will bring, but they are no longer completely convinced that the past has the final word. And listen carefully, because this is where the powerful reminder becomes truly meaningful. It did not necessarily tell your soulmate that you will return. It reminded them that their feelings and memories still exist. It made them realize that something about this connection remains emotionally alive within them. And once they recognize that, they can no longer look at the story in exactly the same way. They may begin imagining what an honest conversation would feel like today. They may wonder what you would say if you met again. They may think about whether you have changed as much as they have. They may even wonder whether the emotional recognition between you would still be there. These thoughts are not answers yet, but they are possibilities. And possibilities are powerful because they give the heart permission to consider what the mind once rejected. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that perhaps the reason this reminder affected them so strongly was because it touched a part of their story they never completely finished processing. There may still be questions. There may still be emotions. There may still be lessons that need to be understood. And instead of fearing that uncertainty, they are becoming more willing to explore it internally. They are beginning to see that a connection can be meaningful without needing to force a specific outcome. They can acknowledge what you meant to them while still allowing life to unfold naturally. But one thing has changed. They are no longer dismissing the possibility that this love story could have another chapter. The reminder planted a question inside them, and that question is becoming stronger every day. What if this connection was not meant to be forgotten, but understood differently once both hearts were ready? And that question is preparing them for an even deeper emotional shift. And now your soulmate is beginning to see the entire connection through a different lens, because the reminder did more than bring back an old memory. It challenged an assumption they had carried for a long time, that because the connection became complicated, it must have been meaningless. For so long, they may have judged the story by its difficult moments. They remembered the distance, the silence, the misunderstandings, the timing that never seemed to cooperate, and the choices that created separation. But now, with greater emotional maturity, they are beginning to understand that a difficult chapter does not automatically mean the entire story was wrong. Sometimes people make decisions from fear. Sometimes circumstances become stronger than intentions. Sometimes two people care about each other, but do not yet know how to handle what they feel. And your soulmate is beginning to recognize that possibility within their own history. Because your heart needs to hear this, they are no longer looking only at what happened. They are starting to look at why it happened and who they have become since then. This distinction is changing everything. They may remember moments when they were emotionally guarded and now realize that they were protecting themselves from vulnerability. They may remember times when they stayed silent and now understand that silence did not necessarily mean a lack of feeling. They may remember walking away and realize that leaving a situation does not always mean the heart has completely left with you. These realizations can be uncomfortable, but they are also freeing because your soulmate is finally taking responsibility for their own emotional truth. They are not blaming you. They are not blaming circumstances. They are simply acknowledging that they may have interpreted certain situations through fear rather than clarity. And that is why this reminder has become so powerful. It gave them a chance to revisit the story without the same emotional defenses they once carried. They are beginning to see that perhaps the connection was not asking them to repeat the past. Perhaps it was asking them to learn from it. And if life ever gives them another opportunity, they want to approach it differently. They may want to communicate more openly. They may want to ask questions instead of making assumptions. They may want to express feelings before silence turns them into misunderstandings. They may want to listen without immediately becoming defensive. Most importantly, they may want to stop allowing fear to make decisions that should come from emotional honesty. This is the transformation happening inside them. They are not simply becoming more hopeful about you. They are becoming more emotionally prepared for whatever the future brings. And that preparation matters because a second opportunity, if it ever comes, would require two people who are willing to show up differently. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that. They know they cannot change what happened before, but they can change how they would respond now. They can become more honest. They can become more patient. They can become more emotionally available. And as they imagine that possibility, they may begin wondering whether you would recognize the person they have become. They may wonder whether you have also grown through the distance. They may wonder whether the things that once separated you would still have the same power today. These questions create a quiet sense of anticipation, not certainty, not a promise, but anticipation. And perhaps that is why the reminder feels like it arrived at such a meaningful point in their emotional journey. It did not give them a guaranteed answer about the future. It simply made them question the ending they had accepted for so long. And once someone begins questioning an ending, they naturally begin considering what could exist beyond it. Your soulmate is now standing in that emotional space. They are no longer saying, that chapter is completely over. Instead, they are quietly wondering, could there be something I never understood? And that question is powerful because it leaves room for growth, healing, and possibility. They may not know whether your paths will cross again, but they are beginning to believe that the connection deserves to be remembered with more honesty than it received before. The reminder has softened something inside them. It has taken the sharpness out of certain memories and replaced it with understanding. And as that understanding grows, so does their willingness to consider the future without immediately shutting the door. What once felt like a finished story now feels more like a story whose meaning they are still discovering. And that realization is bringing them closer to the final truth. Perhaps the most important part of the reminder was not what they saw, heard, or experienced in that moment. It was what their own heart revealed afterward. Because when everything became quiet, their thoughts still returned to you. And now they can no longer pretend they do not understand why. And now your soulmate has reached the deepest realization of this entire journey. Because the powerful reminder they experienced was never truly about one moment, one coincidence, or one memory. It was about what that moment revealed inside them. For a long time, they may have believed that the story between you had already reached its natural ending. They may have accepted the distance, learned to live with the silence, and convinced themselves that whatever happened belonged to another chapter of their life. But after that unexpected reminder brought you back into their thoughts, something changed. They began questioning the certainty they once had. They started realizing that accepting an ending and emotionally understanding an ending are not always the same thing. And perhaps this is why the reminder affected them so deeply. It showed them that there were still emotions, memories, and questions inside them that had never completely disappeared. Because your heart needs to hear this. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that the connection does not need to be forced into a specific outcome for it to have meaning. What matters is that they are finally honest about the impact it had on them. They may now look back and recognize how much they learned from knowing you. They may remember the moments when they felt seen, understood, challenged, or emotionally awakened. They may remember the parts of themselves that appeared around you that they rarely showed anyone else. And now, instead of dismissing those memories as something they should have forgotten, they are allowing themselves to recognize their importance. This does not mean they know exactly what the future holds. It does not mean they have received a guarantee that your paths will cross again. But it does mean that they are no longer completely closed to the possibility. And that difference is enormous. Your soulmate may begin wondering what would happen if life gave you both another opportunity to speak. They may imagine meeting you again after everything that has changed. They may wonder whether the same emotional recognition would still exist, but with greater maturity and understanding surrounding it. They may think about the conversations they would have now, the things they would finally say, and the misunderstandings they would want to clear. These thoughts can create a quiet hope inside them, but it is a different kind of hope than before. It is not based on fantasy or desperation. It is based on the realization that people grow, circumstances change, and sometimes a connection can be understood differently with time. Your soulmate is beginning to believe that perhaps the story was never about returning to exactly what existed before. Perhaps it is about discovering whether something new could grow from everything both of you have learned. And this is where the meaning of the reminder becomes even more powerful. It did not necessarily tell them, go back. It simply made them stop and look again. It made them realize that the emotional chapter they thought they had completely closed still carried something meaningful. And sometimes that realization is enough to change the way someone approaches the future. They may become more willing to communicate, more willing to listen, more willing to admit when they care, more willing to stop allowing pride, fear, or assumptions to make decisions for their heart. If another opportunity appears, they may want to meet it with a completely different mindset. They may want to be present rather than guarded. They may want to speak honestly rather than hoping you somehow understand what they never said. And even if the future unfolds differently, this inner transformation remains meaningful because your soulmate is finally becoming honest with themselves. The strongest message here is not that a reunion is guaranteed. It is that something inside your soulmate has awakened again. They are remembering. They are reflecting. They are questioning. And most importantly, they are no longer automatically dismissing the possibility that this connection still has something to teach them. Perhaps that is why the reminder felt so powerful. It touched a part of their heart that had been quiet, but never completely gone. And now that part is speaking again. Your soulmate may not know what the next chapter looks like, but they are beginning to understand that the previous chapter did not become meaningless simply because it became complicated. Some stories change shape without losing their significance. Some connections become distant without becoming forgotten. And sometimes the most unexpected reminder arrives at exactly the moment when someone is finally ready to see the past with new eyes. Your soulmate may now be standing at that exact emotional threshold. They are not being asked to force anything. They are simply being invited to acknowledge what remains true inside them. And perhaps the most beautiful realization of all is this: what they thought was a reminder of you became a reminder of themselves. Their capacity to feel deeply, to grow, to forgive, and to believe in possibility again. So if this message found you today, hold on to the deeper meaning. Sometimes a story is not over simply because the characters stopped speaking. Sometimes the chapter ends because both people need time to become different versions of themselves before they can understand what the story truly meant. And your soulmate may finally be realizing that the love story they once believed was finished may still have a meaning they have not completely discovered yet.